the occasion for my returning each year is that I'm teaching a special class, special 2-week master class at Yonsei University for the next 3 years. So I've taught it before, twice, but we're going to do 3 more years now in a row. And I teach at Underwood International College, so it's a small writing class. And of course, it's in English because I can't speak Korean well enough. But it's my father's alma mater, so it's kind of a special job for me.
And it's the kind of first book concert in Korea for you, so how do you feel about it?
I actually was here before, but not just as an audience member. I came for Kim Young-ha's book concert. So I feel comfortable. No, I wasn't. I was just in the audience. So I feel very comfortable here, although I can't see anybody. We went out for a beer after, so that was fun.
Mr. Lee said one of the most fun things when he taught in the Yonsei University just for 2 weeks, it was that he could have some beers after class. So he thinks he can have that kind of time again. I read an interview with New York Times on his book section, and in that interview, you said you like to read, especially on flights, which is a place and a time that you can be fully unplugged from everything like internet or phone. So I'm just wondering that the bookworms like you really need that kind of external force to be unplugged.
I think we all do in this society. I for a long time didn't have a smartphone. I resisted it. I just had a regular old phone. And finally I got one because my whole family got one, and so I needed one too. And I found it to be very oppressive to have it all the time. It was a sort of a friend that I didn't like always hanging out with me. And so and I try to turn it off, but I'm just human like anyone else. And so I think it's very hard to resist technology these days. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard even when you're doing something you love, when you're reading books. So I'm afraid now you can have Wi-Fi on the plane now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that's a horrible thing. I think people actually, because when you go on the plane now, you see people reading. You never see people reading anywhere else.
Right. Especially in Korea.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the Jonathan Franzen, who is the writer of the Oppression?
Yes.
It's a kind of similar subject, and then I met Jonathan Franzen before, and then had an interview with him, and then he had the kind of similar problem with you or us. So he just tried to resist kind of internet or phone like that. So he tried to in the cable era, he tried to block the LAN card's entrance with mod, and in the wireless era, he just took out the LAN card. So that was how he was unplugged. It was funny, but I just wonder if you have that kind of the way to be unplugged.
That kind of experience.
That kind of experience.
Yeah, I don't, because I don't know where the LAN card is. But I remember talking with Zadie Smith, and I don't know if some of you know, but there's actually many programs that you can install on your computer to prevent you from. I think it's a program that's maybe even designed for novelists, so that you cannot go on the internet, and if you do, something bad happens to your computer. It's like those pills that alcoholics take, that if you take it and then you drink, then you get sick. But I don't have that kind of. When I'm really working, I guess I can focus. Yeah. But
control yourself.
I can control myself in that way. In other ways, no. But it's still a challenge.
When I heard the title of Gesture Life, I thought the title is just brilliant. It's just amazing title. But we have its revised edition of the Korean version of Just Your Life with the translated title, which is 척하는 삶. But before, we didn't have the Korean version of title. It was just right in Korean, or Just Your Life exactly. So we have our own like translated title, but some worry that that translated title Korean version can be limited to like pretending, the meaning of pretending. So if you understand about the 척하는 삶 in Korean, so how do you think about it? How do you learn from that kind of title?
And originally, the meaning of the gesture life. What do you want to unify it?
Well, the reason why I titled the Gesture Life to begin with was, and it was a title that came to me quite late in the writing, and it was suggested by the main character's daughter. The main character's daughter tells him, "You lead a life of gestures," and a gesture, of course, is something that is, it's a hand gesture like this, but also a kind of a gesture of politeness, a gesture of a kind of performance to be polite or to do the right thing. So it's not exactly pretending. So pretending means that you're always trying to hide something or to be something different. But a gesture sometimes is more about trying to push away any unpleasantries. That's quite different than pretending. So.
Apart from the novel and the our Korean American things, but I want to ask that just if we put the Korean and American, what's the difference in the definition of Korean's gesture life and the definition of American's gesture life? Do you think there's any difference?
I think Americans would say that they do not have a gesture life. That's their dream. That Americans are forthright. They tell you how they feel. They show it. There's not that Americans don't lie. They lie all the time. But that there's no social. There's not the same kind of social pressure to conduct oneself in a way that preserves the social order. I think it's different in Korea and maybe in Asia. It's a different view of the individual and their role in society.
The main factor that makes a gesture life different from other books that also dealing with the issue of comfort woman is that I think this novel is written from the perpetrator's point of view, not the victims. But I heard that at first you were writing this novel from the victim's point of view, but for some reason you just stopped writing this from the victim's point of view and then just changing the narrator. So I just want to ask why, what makes you stop writing at the moment?
And that's a good question. Indeed, I did write the first version of that from the victim's point of view, from the Chang-Rae point of view. Yeah, and I did so because I came over to Korea and went to their house, a sharing house, and interviewed them and met them and heard their stories, which was very, very powerful and emotional for me. So when I went back home to begin writing, I thought back to that experience I had with them and all the things that they said to me. And I found that what I was writing was... That's my phone. Who's the rude person? I don't know why he's calling me out. Okay. I don't know how to do this. But when I went back home, how do I turn this off?
That's one way.
But when I went back home to start writing the novel, I realized that what I was writing was no more moving or special than what the women had spoken to me. And I felt that that wasn't that's not good enough for me as a novelist. Because someone could easily just pick up their transcript of our conversation and get all the things that they needed to know and also needed to feel. And my job as a novelist is not to record history. That's not my job. My job is to give a different kind of perspective into some moment, some world, some character. And so I guess I felt that I wasn't doing something special, and that's why I adopted.
Obviously, there is the issue of comfort womanist that we talked about in Just Alive, but I think that's but the identity of Frank Mihata, the main character, is matters most, because he's not just a perpetrator of the issue, but he's more like a man who lost his roots to the absurdity of the society. So here again, there's the matter of the identity in your novel. But I'm wondering that you usually deal with the issue of identity from your debut novel Native Speaker and A Gesture Life and so on. So I'm just wondering, is there any change in your thoughts about the roots to humanity?
Right now.
Yeah.
The difference.
Or
They're
the
changing, right?
changing process of the novels.
I think it's not changed so much as more thinking about it, and not because the more you think about it, the more complicated everything is. In A Gesture Life, I began to realize that that I was trying to explore the extreme expression of a wish for assimilation. Franklin Hatta wants so much to belong to the society he's in. He wants to belong to the Japanese. He wants to belong to his rich white suburb in New York City. He wants to belong to the idea that he's a good father. He wants to, so it's not so. So his identity has all these different aspects to it. But the thing that's driving it is his need to join the larger, more powerful mainstream group. And I think that's one of the things that I was very worried about as a person, as a thinker, as a writer. The idea of how far people will go and how they will change themselves to try to belong inside a different group. Now, identity, that kind of move, happens, I think, in all countries, but particularly in countries where there are diverse populations, rather than maybe more a population of this that's homogeneous.
We're really sorry about not telling you people about this reading, so it's okay.
Yeah, sure, it's fine.
네, 부탁드리겠습니다.
I noticed inside the store a teenage boy and girl sitting at chairs and working beside each other. The girl folding up various size squares of black cloth, Halloween table linens and napkins, and placing them in boxes. The young man wasn't as serious as the girl, his twin sister. In fact, he was clearly enervated by the task and was effortfully closing up each small box, fitfully running a tape dispenser across the tops. He was talking to her, but it seemed in a haranguing sort of way, his jawbone working continuously. There was a short stack of the tape boxes beside him, which he kept kicking lightly with the side of his foot. The girl, a slender young woman with high, wide-set eyes, wouldn't be annoyed by his attitude. She steadily made her way through a heaping, messy bin of the dark fabric. She would take each piece and shake it free of its haphazard folds and smooth it down flat on her lap, then begin to fold it again from corner to corner. The boy finished sealing a box and, having no others, watched her diffidently. She was picking another square of cloth from the bin and beginning her procedure when he reached over and meanly picked at it, causing it to fall to her feet. She paused, then retrieved it and started over. But again, he messed up her work. This happened twice more until finally the girl took the cloth and shook it open and placed it over her own head. The boy was confused. She sat there with her face covered in black, and he yelled at her at once, and then rose abruptly and left her. This is the second passage. And with what remains, if live is right and all goes well, I'll have just enough to go away from here and live out modestly the rest of my unappointed days. Perhaps I'll travel to where Sunny wouldn't go, to the south and west and maybe farther still, across the oceans, to land on former shores. But I think it won't be any kind of pilgrimage. I won't be seeking out my destiny or fate. I won't attempt to find comfort in the visage of a creator or the forgiving dead. Let me simply bear my flesh and blood and bones. I will fly a flag. Tomorrow, when this house is alive and full, I will be outside looking in. I will already be on a walk someplace, in this town or the next, or 5,000 miles away. I will circle round and arrive again, come almost home.
The part we just read, the second part, that is actually the last paragraph of your novel. And it was just too beautiful for words. So the one question lingered in my mind, so where Haechi has gone?
Yeah, I think it's a question that I still have about where he goes. I mean, he's sort of both banishing himself, exiling himself, and going to a place where he's unsettled and feeling maybe that it's a disturbing place. But he's also recognizing that that unsettling place may be the only place that he can find a home. And I think that's what I was looking for there, that he finally understood that he had to, he doesn't belong really maybe anywhere. And maybe that's one of the things that he can now accept. And I think that's why I use the phrase, come almost home. Because there is no real home for him. And I think that's the cause of all his troubles, that he wanted a home so bad. And now that he finally understands that he's never going to get it, he can finally actually make a real journey.
After having dinner with you, and then you said you really enjoy searching for some special places, like some restaurants, even though that's shabby. And also I heard that there are a lot of cookbooks on your bookshelves. So, and you even cook often. So what kind of dish you most often?
Well, I tend to cook either Korean food or Italian food. I like Italian food.
Okay.
Italian. I think it's a nice combination. So we'll go half the week we make some kind of pasta or some kind of steak fiorentina, or sometimes we make fresh gnocchi at home. But then you get bored of all that pasta, and it starts feeling a little too heavy and too much olive oil, and then I've been starting to make my own kimchi actually. It's not really that great, but
You make your own?
I make my own. Yeah, I make my own because I think it's kind of fun to make, and it's always an experiment. You don't really know what's going to happen, and I was inspired by I was on the plane on Korean Airlines coming over. They had a little movie documentary about one of the kimchi masters. She's a woman down in I don't know where she is. Yeah, she's like a kimchi, PhD. And she had all these little secrets, and so I really paid attention very carefully, and so I tried to use some of her secrets. And my kimchi's not bad, really, but I make too much of it, and so there's always old kimchi. So when we get sick of the Italian food, then we can make it easy kimchi tea, which is great. So I just and as you suggest from your question, I do I guess I get bored easily with everything, and so I'm always looking for. And I love food, and I love wine, and I think I love life, actually. So I'm always looking for a different flavor, a different experience, I think that's the only reason we live. And food is a very easy way to experience that for me.
Before we're talking about the aloft, and I have to ask this question first. Have you flied like plane?
I was in a small plane. I flew it a little bit with the co-pilot, so that was fun. Yeah, a little bit.
You said you have experience about like plane, small plane, and then you actually driving the plane. That experience start from after you doing research on for the aloft or before you interested?
No, before, and then I just went up in the plane, but then afterwards I realized that it was a perfect, literally, vehicle for my character to be up in the plane. I mean, I think this is something that I've learned as a novelist, is that you're sort of doing research all the time without knowing it. Without knowing it. If you pay attention to what you're doing, often it's very useful for writing novels later on. And I had no idea I was going to write a novel about a man who flies a plane. Why would I do such a thing? But when it came right down to it, I was so happy that I did. And that's sort of how I see, obviously some books you want to research and you have a purposeful research for that book. But truth be told, it's the other research, quote unquote, that you're doing just in the course of your life that really makes the directed research really come to life.
If we translate aloft literally into Korean, it's like a heavenwards or higher, because in English the definition of aloft. It was actually published with the title 가족, which means family in English. So, and because the contents of the story is mostly about family, so that's why the publisher decided to make the kind of title for the Korean version. And then I heard the readers' thoughts that it would really fit well with the story. So what do you think about the Korean version of the title?
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly good title for the book. But I think the sense of aloft is that he is finally, after all those many years of being away from his family, I think that's what he's so high that he doesn't want to deal with his family. And finally now, this is the story of when he must deal with his family, when he can't be aloft, when he has to be on the ground. So of course the title in English is sort of his psychological problem, that he's aloft. But really what the book is really about is being on the ground with the people he must love, which is of course family.
Feels like you already expected the next question of the next question. The next question is, Jerry Battle flies to the sky, especially when he feels tired of his daily life, or if there is complicated things in life, he just flies to the sky. And it seems like he is not facing the reality, but just escaping from this. So, but I don't think that's only about Jerry Battles. So today, people are kind of have a tendency to escape the problems or the reality, and is not facing it in the face. So, do you think it's only Jerry Battle's problem, or it's kind of common traits of the people today?
I think absolutely it's part of the modern condition. In a different time, we were always together. We lived together. We lived in a small community. We knew everything and too much about people. We slept with our whole family in the same house, right? But in our modern society, it allows us with our technology to always be alone, and to value that almost more than anything else. And even if we don't value it, we could become so accustomed to it that now we're insulated from all the real issues that real people have. So even if we want to care, we can't. we don't know how anymore. It's always somebody else. And I think that's one of the great anxieties of the novel. That's what I'm really worried about in the novel. That we're all in our little bubble. Yeah. And that's what Jerry Battle is in his plane. He's in his little bubble. But really, if you think about it, we've constructed for ourselves in our modern society little bubbles around ourselves. And unfortunately, there's a lot of connection in the digital age, but that connection is always virtual. It's never real. So that's one of the things that I think I'm really concerned about. It's not just family, of course, that he's trying to connect with. He's just trying to connect with humanity. And trying to understand that life is only gets meaning from these connections that are often troublesome, messy, unhappy, but also full of joy sometimes.
In the end of the story, all family members who were separately live separately once, but they got to live under the same roof finally. But of course, that's not just from the goodwill. It was because Jack, Jerry's son, just went his company. That's why they got to live all together. But it looks happy ending. But some would say that it can be maybe they can be rude to ask this question. But I just want to ask that it would be a kind of easy ending for you. So are you satisfied with that ending that you put?
Yeah, I wanted the ending to be where they're all together for sure, but that again, it's not perfectly happy. As you suggest, the only reason that they're together is because of necessity. But necessity sometimes leads us to good things, and you can clearly see that their togetherness does not mean automatically love and happiness. It means inviting all the kinds of things that happen in life, and that they're going to begin recognizing them. I'll also point out that at the very end of the story, Jerry Battle is not with them. He's off by himself in his newly dug out pool underground. So he can hear them, but he's not quite with them either. And he's still not, he's happy that they're all together. But he's still coming to the idea that now he's going to be on the ground. Yeah. And people have asked me about that ending because he's literally under the ground like in a big grave. So people ask, does that mean that you're symbolizing his death? And I guess in a way I am, but I guess the death of a former Jerry. The death of Jerry, of who he was. But that doesn't mean that he can jump into the arms of his family now. So there'll be another little step. It's very similar to Just Your Life as well.
Right.
It's never resolved, but it's almost there. And I think that's the sense of life that I have, is that we're always almost to our dreams. Never reaching them, but almost.
I think writers of this age is like nearly emotion researcher, like human researcher, who studies on human feelings, like every feelings like guilty or some hatred, like something like that. So, and also relating with this, I heard your father is a psychiatrist. So, do you think you were influenced by your father or inherited some kind of related traits from your father?
I certainly learned a lot from his books. He had a lot of books on psychology. Freud, Jung, Adler, a lot of developmental psychology, childhood psychology, and I read all of them. Yeah. When I was young, I didn't quite understand all of the stuff. I kind of liked to read for the sexy parts, but after a while, I was fascinated by all this, because really, many of those books tell stories about people, about their problems, about their symptoms, and they try to figure out, well, where did this come from? And I think from an early age, I was very interested in that, about how people become the people they are. And I think you're absolutely right. Novelists are psychologists, philosophers, humanists. So we're always thinking about the human condition and human possibility, human expression. And I think that's maybe the one thing that makes a novelist or not, that you must be very, very interested in people. From up here, a half mile above the earth, everything looks perfect to me. I am in my nifty little skyhawk, banking her back into the sun, having nearly completed my usual fair weather loop. Below is the eastern end of Long Island, and I'm flying just now over that part of the land where the two gnarly forks shoot out into the Atlantic. The town directly ahead, which is nothing special when you're on foot, looks pretty magnificent now, the late summer sun casting upon the macadam of the streets a soft ebonite sheen, its orangey light reflecting back at me, matching my direction and speed in the windows and bumpers of the parked cars and swimming pools of the simple square houses sit snugly in rows. There is a mysterious rune-like cipher to the newer, larger homes wagoning in their cul-de-sac hoops, and then too in the flat roofs of the shopping mall buildings with their shiny metal circuitry of HVAC housings and tubes. From up here, all the trees seem ideally formed and arranged, as if fretted over by a persnickety florist god, even the ones, no doubt volunteers, clumped along the fencing of the big scrap metal lot, their spindly, leggy uprush not just a pleasing garnish to the variegated piles of old hubcaps and washing machines, but then, for a stock guy like me, mere heartbeat shy of 60, hard to even say that, the life signs of a positively priapic yearning. Just to the south, on the baseball diamond, our people's pattern supreme, the local Little League game is entering the late innings. The baby blue-shirted players positioned straight away and shallow. In the bleachers, their parents only appearing to sit church quiet and still. The sole perceivable movement, a bounding golden-haired dog tracking down a frisbee in deep, deep center field. Go boy, go.
Do you have any experience in the US, like this kind of concert?
Yeah, I have.
Is there any difference between here or the kind of procedure where?
Not really. I do like the students reading. It's very nice to hear that. I wish they could do it for me everywhere I went, rather than I doing it. I don't actually enjoy doing it myself, and I haven't read those passages in many years. That's very strange to me.
After Almost was published, one media in Miami praised your novel and mentioning Cheever and John Dyke and Yates. And also you said in your previous interview, you said you like especially Ernest Hemingway, John Dyke, and John DeLillo. And then you mentioned about especially John DeLillo. And you said as poet, his approach in all of his works is so very particular and uncommon. I like fearless writers. So, what's your definition of good writers? And also, what would be the writer's biggest fear? Maybe being stagnation.
I think, well, it's different. I would say that my favorite writers as a reader is quite different than what I don't think I would say that there's any way that that one should write. I think writers there's such variety, so it's hard to compare writers, I think. But as a reader, for me, the writers that speak to me most deeply are those who marry a very deep emotional kind of power to their writing with very beautiful music in their writing. So that it's all about language and emotion. not necessarily story all the time, not even necessarily really smart ideas. I really admire that. You know, for example, a writer that I really admire is Philip Roth, but more for his brain and for the way that he thinks, rather than for the writing itself. While I admire him, he's not one of my favorite writers. He's not one of my favorite writers. My most favorite writers are those whose language, whose writing has a certain kind of music to it. And that music leads to, and of course, you know, obviously their descriptions, leads me to some, you know, real emotional kind of response to it. But in terms of fearless, I think that sometimes you recognize fearlessness in a writer, where they're willing to push the story or the characters or their language to an extreme, and maybe do something that doesn't feel right. You know, they do something that seems like it's absolutely the wrong kind of writing. And I think that's the kind of writer that I admire the most. Because in the end, what we're all trying to do is to create art. Not to, art of course that entertains, but really essentially art. And art must always be surprising, unlikely, radical, fresh. So I think that the writers that I admire most really let themselves go. You can see that they can't help but try to be free. And that's what we all want. We want to be free in everything that we do, but especially in the making of art.
I heard that you attempted very new things in your new novel, recent novel, On Such a Fusi. And the On Such a Fusi will be published in Korea maybe on June, I guess. So I haven't read your book yet. So I just want to hear about your recent book On Such a Fusi. And I heard that there's a kind of new things and kind of SF or something new in there. So I want to hear about your story.
Well, you know, there's a lot to talk about, but you know, basically, I did end up writing something quite different. I didn't intend to. I did not, but I ended up doing it. And people have been calling it science fiction or dystopian fiction, and certainly it has some of those kinds of features. But I was saying today, and during an earlier interview today, that really I wrote the book as a folk tale. Yeah, a very simple folk tale about a girl who goes out into the world, and we follow along in her adventure as we discover the world and what it means to the people telling her story. And so to me it's a very simple story. And for me that was very different actually, because my previous novels have been so much about the psychology and consciousness of all these characters as we've been talking about. But this particular book is not really about that at all. It's just about a kind of tour of this new place and how her touring and her discovery of this new kind of world then lets the people who are telling her story think about themselves. So to me it's in some ways it's a very old-fashioned kind of story.